Hi guys, hello and welcome to another assignment tutorial as we will be solving our assignment number 7 today, which is about multi-dimensional array. So I am in the process of setting up the environment and writing some initial code. So using static system.console so that I don't have to continuously write console.writeLine and I can just refer to it. You are already familiar with that. And let me write the read instruction to hold the screen. So that instruction is also in place. What we need to do in this assignment is that we need to create a two-dimensional array to store 5 scores of 3 students. So that way, we know for sure that I have a two-dimensional array of scores. And as I know that I have 3 students, so I know that in my main curly braces, I will need 3 separate sets of curly braces, one for each student. And for each student, I need to store the values for 5 scores. So let me add those 5 scores. And let me copy this for each of the 3 students. And remember, you do not put a comma after the 3rd student. All students are comma separated except for the last one. Okay, so that creates the first half of the application, where I was asking you to create a two-dimensional array that stores 5 scores of 3 students. Now what we'll be looking at next over here is that we need to calculate the sum and average of scores for each student. So that means I need to be able to preserve the sum of each student, and if I have the sum of each student preserved, I can always calculate the average based on the sum. So I will need a parallel single-dimensional array to store the sum. And since there are 3 students, the size of this parallel array will be 3. I will need a nested loop, one to control the rows and one to control the values within the rows. So we will do that for the scores array. And every time we are done with, every time we pull a score of a student out, we will add it to the sum. And we will change the element counter or the index number of the sum every time we start out with a new student. So what we need to do is we also need to display the sum and average of scores of all the students. So we also need a variable to store the average and the sum of all students, all scores. So now let's get started here. So as I told you, I need for every student, I'm creating my first level of nested loops. This will run the first level of length. 0 means I'm talking about the first dimension. For the second dimension, I will use getLength 1. So let me copy this. Let me call this one sum total. Okay. And this is for each student score. So I'll just going to call this one SC for score. So as I'm traversing through the scores array. So what I'm doing is, as I'm going through each of the students, I will be grabbing their sum. And I'll be calculating a running total for that index, for that student. So I will be grabbing the value from scores, student score. So I'm going to be grabbing the value one by one and adding it to the sum. That way, at the end of the cycle, I would be done with the first student. And now I'm going to be done with the second one. Now I'm going to be done with the third student. So at the end of this process, I would have calculated the running total of all the scores. So I only need to display the sum and the average of all the scores for each student. I do not need to be displaying their scores according to the description given. So here, outside the loop, when I have calculated the running total of all the students, I now need to go through the length of the sums, which is 3, because there are only 3 students. So I will declare a variable which will go which will loop through the array 3 times. I should be less than the length of sum, I++. Every time it runs, I need to be able to display, I'll start I with 0, of course, okay. All I need to do is I need to display the sum and the average. So I will do a write line, sum of scores for student number, and I'll just do I+1 because so that, generally it starts with 0, right? So it doesn't make a lot of sense to say student number 0. So that's why I'm just adding 1. Okay, student number 1. Sum of scores for student number 1 is, and then I'll display the sum current index. Likewise, I need to display the average. And remember, the average will be average scores for student number 1, or the next time will be 2, and so on and so forth, will be sum divided by 5, because there are 5 scores for each student. So that way, I'll take care of that. And finally, I need to be able to display the sum of all, so and the average of all. So for that purpose, I can just simply take my sum total, and every time I traverse through the loop, I will just add the sum of a student to the sum total. That way, sum total in each cycle, I will initialize all my variables, so that's basically a good thing to do. Okay, so this will give me the sum of the scores of all the students. Now comes the average. How will I going to calculate the average? I will not going to say sum total divided by 3 or divided by 5. Why? Because there are 3 students and each student has 5 scores. So what I will do is I will say divide this by the first dimension's length times the second dimension's length. So this will be 3 because there are 3 rows. And this will be 5 because there are 5 students in each row, or 5 scores in each row. And now I can display, write line, sum of all students' scores an average of all students' scores. It's AVG. Okay. Now let me run this application. Oh, in copy pasting, I did made one mistake, guys. So let me fix this mistake first. And let's run it, because then otherwise it's only going through the first 3 items. So now when I run it, I will probably, here we go, that's basically what it shows me. If I update any of the scores of a student, let's say if I make this one 50. So as you will see over here, that the average score is 84.6. Now let me make this 100 again. And you will see that the average score will be up to 88. So this basically shows me that it is calculating the values and is performing the results. So one little fix that I made was when I copy pasted this, I forgot to change it to second dimension, it was still locked at the first dimension. So the inner loop was also running 3 times instead of 5 times. As a result, the rest of the code was not working properly. It was giving me logical errors. So anyway, so this should pretty much suffice your needs and should be enough to complete the assignment problem. Catch you in the next tutorial, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.